Hey guys, so I wanted to do a behind the scenes of my sim and kind of give you an updated, it's changed quite a bit since my last video. So I wanted to do a behind the scenes. There's another video I've got that has shows you, kind of walks you through a full start to finish, or start to finish on the sim and all components since I've updated it. But this is meant to be more behind the scenes and kind of walk through what I have and how it's kind of set up. I guess I'll start just kind of walking through each of the pieces I have now. So this is new. This is the Open Cockpit overhead manual, or overhead panel. Got it. It was pre-assembled. It was really nice, and it's been working out great. I've had it for about a year now. It's been awesome. Love it. Works great. I've got so this is the main battery button, which actually should be off since the sim's off. But I did manage to wire that in, or can program that to turn everything else, all the comms, all the other stuff off. So everything basically in the cockpit does turn dark. So that's kind of cool. So that's the overhead panel. And I've got the 3-bay pedestal here with the radios. I'm missing quite a few pieces, but this is all I needed, or all I wanted really at the time. Plus with money and everything, there's the yaw dampener panel and some other stuff that kind of go down here, but really didn't care to spend the money on that at this point. But comm radio, nav radio, comm 1, nav 1, comm 2, nav 2, and here's our transponder. Also the cargo fire panel. This has not been assembled yet, and then the fire panel. So this does works pretty cool. So you can kind of see here, if there's a fire and the alarm's going off, you can pull up and discharge the left bottle and or the right bottle and extinguish the fire. This throttle unit is a real 737 throttle unit. I got this about 6 months ago or so. I took it and converted it for sim use, and so it was not an easy task, but I was able to take all the mechanical functions and tie it into the sim. I did get some special help from another simmer, and I've got a blog post on my website, thetechriot.com, and on there I kind of walk through the whole process. I've got a couple other videos just dedicated to the throttle, so if you want to know more, check out my other videos and check out my blog, thetechriot.com, and it walks you through a lot of that information. And just kind of give you a this book actually is kind of cool as well, since it's here. This kind of walks through a lot of the systems of the airplane, and as you're trying to figure out, as I add more components and trying to figure out how everything works, this helps give you a good idea of what's going on. But I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of show you what's underneath this on the 3-bay pedestal. So I started out with an Open Cockpit DC card or board. So that's what this is right here. That's the Open Cockpit DC motorboard. It's a piece of crap. I've been having problems since day one, and so has pretty much everybody else I've seen that has the same card on my cockpit forum. The motors keep cutting in and out, and the board shuts off. It has to be reset each time, and it's a pain in the ass because I got to reset the SIOC program as well, which resets radios and a bunch of other stuff. So it usually would go out when I was on the final approach, as the motors kept kind of tuning up and down, spinning up and down. The board would cut out, and I'd have to reset, but then it'd reset the radios, and my LS would be all off, so I'd have to retune the radios. Anyways, a nightmare. So that board is a piece of crap. I've traded that in now for a Fidgets motorboard. I still use that board for the input and output buttons. So all the switches and stuff from the throttle come on or plug into that as well. So this card right here is a Fidgets motorboard card, and I use that to connect into the or motorize these motors down here, which actually control the servos. I don't know how well you can see in the video here, but those are the motors. Hopefully this is a little bit better angle here. And then I've also got a USB hub in here for all the other modules. So all the radio modules and stuff are USB plug and play. And so those connect here. All the fire panel stuff is basically on its own Open Cockpit boards for the input and output. So this is an output board for all the LEDs. and there's an input board for all the other switches kind of in the back corner. I don't know if you can see it again in the video, but that's kind of what's in what I've installed in here. Bunch of crazy routing. It's not very pretty, but it does work. And as you can kind of tell, I haven't painted this. I'm not one for aesthetics. Call me crazy, but I just want to get things working and kind of get on there and play with it. So my aesthetics is not great. So kind of moving forward on that. One other thing that is noteworthy, the overhead panel frame is built out of steel, 1 inch by 1 inch steel that I got from the local hardware store. I never welded in my life, bought a welder, figured out how to do it. What a surprise, because this overhead panel weighs about 40 pounds, and my welding skills are not great, but it works okay right now. I do want to at some point rebuild that, make it a little bit more sturdy, because this isn't the video. I don't know if you're going to see the video because I'm sure the video is a little shaky, but you know, if I move a switch or turn a switch on, the whole overhead panel kind of shakes a little bit. So I do want to make that a little bit more sturdy and stable. And my neighbor is actually a welder, so he could help me. I just need to get some parts and some time. But that's kind of the overhead, and I'll show you kind of behind it what it looks like. So that's the kind of the back of it, and that comes pre-assembled from Open Cockpit. And then you can see, oh yeah, so on here as well, there's a pin or a bolt right here, and that bolt is a hinge for the whole overhead panel. So I don't know if you can tell in the video, but this cockpit is in a small room that I also share with my office. And so as I'm walking in, I don't want to hit my head, or I'm getting up and hitting my head. So I can now actually pivot this whole the whole overhead panel vertical, and that allows me to save some space in here. Back. The other new thing is the MCP, the autopilot. This is the version 3 from Open Cockpit. I had one of the older versions. There's a few, 2 more LEDs, 1 more button. There's not a whole lot new, but it's a little more stable. It's backlit, kind of nice. I also did add some backlighting to this. So these 2 switches down here, one switch is for the 5-volt backlight, and the other switch is for the 12-volt backlight. And those backlights, it turns on all the back in the main instrument panel, and as well for the these are permanent backlit because they're USB controlled, and I don't think I can turn those on or off. So, and I also have been able to get the backlighting. I've taken in this switch is actually, I converted that use to be the actual backlight for the throttle. So that's also on there as well. So the full cockpit is pretty much backlit. From the other videos, this is the same yoke that I had. I guess I'll talk a little bit about software at this point too. Let me turn this on. Keep getting sidetracked here. So this Belkin makes a power strip that has a little remote control. So instead of me keep having to turn components on or off, or trying to crawl underneath here and put on, turn the strip on, I have a little remote control switch here that allows me to turn everything on and off. So that's pretty nice. Now what else was I going to be talking about? Oh, software. So the Fidgets card here, it's a cool card, but I couldn't find any software for the card to be able to work with the throttles. So I had to write my own, which wasn't a huge deal. I was able to do it in about a day because I already had another software written for the yoke actually. So I was able to reuse a lot of code and do that. I'll probably be releasing that for a small fee, or maybe free, we'll see. It's not quite ready for prime time. It works pretty well, but there's a few little glitches I still need to work out. But I did end up having to write some software, Fusion software that comes with the yoke. It worked okay when I first had the sim, but now that I've got the sim, I'm going to put this down so the video's not so shaky and bugging you guys. Now that the video, or now that I've been using the yoke more, the software that comes with it is really not too realistic. For instance, there's a ground shaker that, when it's on the ground and you're taxiing, it kind of bounces and vibrates. But the problem is there's no rhyme or reason. It's once it's on the ground, it's always vibrating, even if you're parked and not moving. So, and it really, even though I would save the setting to turn it off, it still would keep going. So there was a lot of issues with that. Also, as you can see, or hopefully, I don't know if you can see in the video right now, and through their software, and I needed to communicate and interface with ProSim. So, and ProSim is my avionics package. You can go research that if you're not familiar. But there's some other buttons on here that I wanted to be able to use for like that when I'm on VATSIM, the online experience. I wanted to be able to use one of those buttons for the push to talk. And so, anyway, long story short, I wrote some software for this, and I couldn't get Flight Illusion to give me source code, so I had to learn. I kind of had to reverse engineer their commands. It's a serial port basically that they send commands to, and I had to kind of spend some time doing that. It wasn't easy. It took me a couple weeks to get it, but I was able to do that, and now I have software that I can use. And some of the things their software didn't account for was like if it was gusty or windy in a roplane, you kind of feel a jolt of force in that direction for where the gust came from. So I've incorporated that kind of stuff into the software. And also another limitation, autopilot, if the autopilot was engaged. However, it only worked for the Microsoft Autopilot. Since I'm using ProSim for all the avionics, I needed something else that interfaced with ProSim to be able to look for when I engage the autopilot on the MCP through that software. So again, I ended up writing that into the code, and I'll show you kind of that program here. While I bring that up, so long story short, there was a lot of issues with that software that I didn't really like, so I kind of built my own. So I'll show you the software real quick. So on the software, on the left side here is the information that's coming from the yoke. This is telling us the position for the yoke, what the force is going to be, and what the crosswind and headwind components are. And then everything on the right is everything from the flight sim environment itself. And it tells me the positions, the airspeed trim, things like that, what the wind's doing. So this is the information program, that's information I needed. And then I got a bunch of different settings here. You can change, how much force is applied, based on if you're flying a Cessna or a Boeing. You can adjust those force levels. The sensitivity as you're turning the controls, how much does that actually turn the airplane? How much does the wind affect the force on the yoke? Some dead zones, trim speeds that you can tune on here. Autopilot settings. This allows you to follow the autopilot for ProSim. So I have an option here. I can read an FSU IPC offset, and then once this offset is true, then the yoke will go into autopilot mode. And so there's 3 modes. Follow the autopilot, force feedback in a kind of a center mode where everything kind of centers back to center when you release. So in normal mode, right, it's just force feedback mode, that's normal mode. And then when it detects the autopilot's engaged, it'll actually follow the autopilot. And then this sensitivity levels, how much does that actually show on the yoke? If I move this all the way, a little bit of the autopilot will make the yoke go a long way. So, and then the buttons, in my trim settings, I can send an FSU IPC command, which I used, and I use that to, there's another third-party module in the software that uses a virtual joystick. Because this software is not an actual joystick driver, and I can use it on VATSIM to use the push-to-talk. And so that's kind of cool. So anyway, that's that software. I'll kind of talk a little bit about what I use in my sim. So if you can kind of see the screen here, you can see I've got a bunch of different things on here. Sidetrack for a moment, I've got a G1000 simulator on here, which is kind of cool. And even though we're talking about a 737, this is, if you're doing it, which I am a private pilot with an instrument rating. Before I got my instrument, I never switched screens, I never needed to, never had to do flight plans really, multiple legs. All my cross country's been under 2 hours, so it was all pretty much direct. But then going through my instrument training, you got to load approach charts, you got to find frequencies, runway lengths, figuring out what your ETA for the next waypoint is, things like that. And there's a lot of information, a lot of stuff in the G1000 that I never knew existed. So dollars for the software package, but it's pretty accurate and it works really well. 1,000 aircraft. So, but yeah, that helps a lot. So now that I've kind of sidetracked off of that, so I use Prepared 3D version 2 point, make a noticeable difference on the performance. I also use Full Terrain FTX. As well, I use Rex. Gives me the textures for the terrain, bridges, highways, stuff like that, as you can see here. Some of the water stuff. FTX Global. And then there's another one that I use. I don't know if it shows my... I don't know if I have an icon on the screen. I'd have to remember what it was. But I do use... so this Texture Direct, this is the textures for actual the weather. And it makes the clouds and everything so much more realistic. So I use this and stuff like that. I think it's called Ultimate Terrain. I don't remember exactly, but here you can kind of change, you know, what the cloud textures are, what the sky colors are, things like that. And then plus Overdrive, which is the weather engine, which doesn't appear to work with Prepared 3D, at least the version 2. Probably since version 2.2 and on. I don't know if it's my computer or if it's Rex, but I can't use the weather engine, so I'm kind of stuck using Prepared 3D's weather engine, which is okay, but I did like the Rex weather engine a lot better. So I'm still kind of waiting for the Weather Architect and the other weather products on the Rex 4 site to come out. I'm very anxious to use those. So I've got vPilot. This is what I quad core with I think it's an NVIDIA GTX 780 or 760 video card, 3 gigs of RAM. It works really well. It works great so far with Prepared 3D, and there's nothing other set. So this computer, all it does, and it's connected to my projector, so I've got a projector up here along with a dedicated AC unit, but that's a whole nother story. This room I have a lot of computers and stuff and equipment running, so I've had to put a dedicated AC unit in there, and it actually helps a lot with the projector, since the projector generates a lot of heat. But anyway, it's that projector Optima. I think it's HD25E is the model number, and it works great. There's a lot more expensive projectors out there, but friend who did audiovisual stuff, he had a screen sitting around he wasn't using anymore, so he just gave that to me for free, which was really nice. But again, this computer, it drives this monitor, which is kind of environment. And then I've got another computer down here. You can see it looks like it's seeing some better days. But that computer is driving all of the events, all the controls, all the radios, the overhead, everything's driven off that one computer. And I wanted to offset as much as I could off the computer running pins on a dedicated server, and I'll connect to that real quick. But what that does is it actually runs my ProSim software. So ProSim can use up some probably a bit overkill. Probably would run just fine on my instrument computer that runs all the instruments, because that's as well an i7. Along with Prepared 3D, I went through the add-ons. That's really the only add-ons I have, is the textures and the weather. And then during my instrument training, I switched over to ForeFlight. And ForeFlight, there's a module, I think it's like $30, called FSX Flight. A little pricey for what it does, but it connects into the ForeFlight Sim, or the ForeFlight app on your iPad over Wi-Fi, and will actually use the sim environment to send all that information. So it's just like you're flying in real life. Great when you're doing and learning instrument stuff, so you can learn how the iPad and how to navigate the screens. So you can use that with your sim. And the same thing if you're an Android user. There's a program out there called Navigator, which I used forever. It's a lot cheaper than ForeFlight. However, during my instrument training, I realized that Navigator just isn't quite though. But if you're an Android user, VFR Pilot, Navigator is a really, really good option for cheap. So I would highly recommend it. And then the other module that runs on here is the ProSim Audio. So that's just a small module that runs on here for the audio stuff, for like the call-outs and the disconnects, warnings, things like that from ProSim itself. So I've got a dedicated power supply. You can kind of see on the floor down there. That power supply is running my 5 and 12. I'll show you some behind the instrument panel. It's not very clean. Hopefully you can see a little bit. I end up putting this cloth over it because when the backlight's on, it bleeds over to the screen, so this helps keep the backlight from bleeding. But basically, and then some of the servo modules as well. So that's the kind of behind the scenes of the main instrument panel. Not anything too sexy. So I think that's probably... and then for the rudder pedals, I just have the Satek ProFlight rudder pedal. That's pretty much everything. So if you have any questions or whatever, feel free to check out my blog or